Hi, I'm Trevor and this is Mondoro Media. Today we're talking about 7 conversation hijackers and how to avoid them using a real-life example. Welcome to Mondoro Media, where we talk about ways in which Africans can participate in the growth and development of Africa. Today we're looking at 7 communication pitfalls or conversation hijackers that are quite prevalent in our society. Obviously the first thing that comes to mind is race, and that's a big issue in this country, but there are many other things that hijack our conversations and stop us from actually exploring issues. The example that we're going to be using today is one that was trending recently, which South Africans, you might have seen that hashtag or whatever. It is a conversation between the DA's interim leaders, John Steenhuisen and Flo Letoaba of the SABC. They were discussing the DA's decision to take the government to court for some rules they made about the lockdown. So today we're going to talk about how that conversation went, because it went completely off track, and identify all the things that took it off track. And in so doing, we'll discuss some of the common things in our conversations that hijack our conversations and stop us from really exploring issues. To get into the first hijacker, let's look at this clip.
Just as a start, the DA is challenging what it calls irrational lockdown rules. What do you believe to be so irrational? I know that there are 3 major issues that you're challenging at this point. Please, can you go through them for us so we can understand what the actual issue is?
So as you can see in that clip, she takes a position, although she doesn't explicitly do so. And that position happens to be opposite of what the DA has. She basically is asking him to explain himself without saying so. She's asking him what's so irrational about this, and can you help us understand what the actual issue is? That's not really a problem in itself, that's a fair question, but taking a position can contribute to derailing a conversation because the other person has to now respond to your position or feels pressure to respond to your position, and whether that position is aligned with theirs or not, they feel pressure to either align with you more if you're aligned or to defend themselves if they feel like you're on the opposite side. That's a small thing, but it primed the way the rest of the discussion went, as you can see in his response.
Well, rules and regulations should be applied that make sense in terms of combating the virus and dealing with the health pandemic.
So the second thing is playing the man, or the lady in this case. So you can see that right off the bat, he's kind of condescending by explaining the law to her as if she doesn't understand it, when her question wasn't about the law, it was about specifically what the DA had chosen to do. And he does that in a kind of condescending way. And he does this again later on in that answer.
Thirdly, there is no rational reason from a health perspective why e-commerce should not be allowed. It is the safest way for consumers to buy products without leaving their homes, without having to stand in crowded shopping centers, without having to exchange money or cards and tap into keypads and interact with products and other goods in the store. It therefore is irrational for government to say, oh, well, it's unfair to other businesses. Well, that's like saying that cell phones were unfair to landlines, or that the motor vehicle was unfair to horse-drawn cars.
See, there he starts off again talking about how there's no rational reason. The whole question was, what is irrational about it? And then he just restates his position, there's nothing rational. And then goes on to explain e-commerce to her, even though she had conceded originally that e-commerce made sense. He goes on to mansplain it as if she doesn't understand things. Maybe that's because he's reading a script. Maybe that's because he's an emotional child. Who knows? At the end of the day, that contributes to the derailment of the conversation, because it's now centering the two of them in the conversation and not the issue. In his whole answer, he starts off by explaining the law to her, explains a little bit of his position in the middle, and then ends off again by mansplaining things and implying that she's not understanding things. He doesn't fully address the question and really break down where the irrationality lies. He just restates his position. So because of her taking a position initially, or because he wasn't prepared, or because he was too prepared, whatever the reason, his response didn't address the issue and just escalated the derailment. And now we're going further and further off track in the conversation. We're moving slowly away from the real issue and into a fight between the two people, which later broke out. But this is kind of where it starts. And you'll notice that throughout the interview, he carries on with this tone, with this sort of approach of being somewhat condescending. And we can see exactly how that plays out in this next clip.
The fact of the matter is that we're dealing with COVID-19. We're dealing with this virus. We've never been in this situation before. And one then needs to ask you then, if you're feeling that the government is not treating this properly, what would you have done? What would you have done in the shoes of the president? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about life and death issues, Mr. Steenhuisen.
So as you can see there, she's now personalizing the issue essentially. She's asking him what he would have done. You know, that's a fair question to be honest, but the way she asked it was almost like as he was condescending towards her, she's now making him seem uncaring or seem unreasonable at least. Whatever it is that he gets from how she asked it, the point is she's now making it about him. Again, it's not about the issue anymore. We've kind of moved from the issue a little bit. We're still using the issue, but what's actually happening is that now there's an implied battle between these two people, and they're now trading blows using the issue. The issue is no longer the center of attention. So that conversation is already derailed by now, although it only becomes fully evident later. The problem with this is that it shifts the focus away from the conversation, from the issue, into the personality. He has now to either show that he's caring or dismiss what she's saying. He has to respond in a way that defends him from the implied accusation she's making. And the conversation goes now completely off track. And then the next clip will show you the turning point where it all fell apart.
Yes, but you think you're missing the point entirely. The reason that there was no social distancing is because you've got the entire nation out on the streets in a narrowed bracket of time in the day. Of course, you're going to have more people congestion.
So there it is. That was the trigger point. That's where everything fell apart. You can tell in the beginning of that clip the way she kind of tosses her head.
Yes, but you think you're missing the point entirely. The reason that there was no...
Which is definitely affected by what he's saying and how he's saying it. And in his case, he's blatantly now assuming she's ignorant for not understanding it. It's like you're missing the point entirely. Like he's made his point quite clearly, which he hasn't, and she just is too dumb to get it. And that's the fourth pitfall to avoid. Assuming that the person you're speaking to is ignorant or stupid. That not only doesn't address whatever you're talking about, but also puts them on a defensive and makes the conversation about this person and yourself, no longer about the issue.
Now we know that the virus attacks people with
comorbidities. If they're
comorbidity.
dead, sir. Their mental health won't matter if they're dead, sir. The fact of the matter is that people in the Western Cape are dying.
Diabetes and hypertension are both comorbidities that really affect the ability of the virus to be able to spread further. The more unhealthy you keep people, the more at risk you make them of actually being able to contract both the virus as well as other serious health concerns. Both these diabetes and hypertension are associated with COVID deaths, and not allowing people to exercise is going to exacerbate that quite explicitly.
That brings us to our next point, bullshit argument. That was a completely bullshit argument. He's implying that diabetes and hypertension will develop in healthy adults over a short period just because of exercise being confined to 3 hours. That's a little bit ridiculous. That's a very common thing when people feel threatened or under pressure or defensive. They bring in these bullshit arguments that make no sense. And this is exactly what he's doing. He's just sort of escalating his position because he feels like he needs to defend himself for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about the issue anymore. We're now piling on hyperbole and hoping it makes us win the argument. And now the conversation is almost completely derailed. And this next question is the final nail in the coffin.
You said that in the press briefing that you had that South Africans are begging for clarity on the way forward under the lockdown. Which South Africans are you speaking for?
There's that question. So like I said in the beginning, race is a big issue in this country. What she's implying, for those who didn't get it, is that he's representing white people, specifically middle-class white South Africans. At this point, as you can see, we're not talking about the regulations or the DA court action or any of that. We're now specifically talking about the DA's perception, or specifically Mr. John Steenhuisen's perception. And all hope has been lost of having a rational conversation at this point, as she says later. And he just escalates in this next clip.
Yeah, which ones and where
would
are
you like me to provide you with a list of them?
That would be great.
What are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking where are you having these which thousands of South Africans are you speaking to? On social media,
I host a twice weekly show called Corona Cast. You should tune in sometime.
I will.
And we have interactions with lots and lots of citizens who send through their queries. I receive a lot of correspondence as a leader of the opposition from citizens who are fed up.
So you're talking.
with the fact
So you're talking
of being
for those
treated
people that
like
you're
children.
interacting with.
You can see that he's no longer talking about the conversation. He's now peacocking, which is our seventh point. So instead of addressing the question she's asked, he's now, because she's asked a question that's loaded, he's now making it about how important he is. I'm important, I'm an important person. I have lots of meetings, whatever. That's what he's doing right now. He's talking about how many thousands of people he talks to online, thousands of emails that he gets, how he's the leader of the opposition. Basically, he's completely lost track of why he's there, and he's now proving how important he is, or trying to prove how important he is. He could have answered that question in so many different ways, but he decided to center himself in it. He could have centered the people he's speaking to by saying something along the lines of, well, thousands of people that we've spoken to on social media have this concern, and their families and their health, and made that the issue. But then they spend the whole last minute and a half of valuable airtime arguing about how many followers he's got, essentially, and the whole conversation is derailed. At this point, the conversation is in the cemetery. The issue is completely forgotten. We're now talking about each other and attacking each other, essentially. So those are the 7 communication pitfalls to avoid when you're speaking to people, if you want to have productive conversations. And why is this important specifically in this context? Well, the reason political leaders come onto TV and other platforms is to expand their base, basically, is to appeal to other people. And I'm 90% sure that anyone who didn't like that guy before he came on still didn't like him, or didn't like him even more before. There's nobody that he won over. The only people who agreed with him are people who already agreed with him. He could have approached this thing entirely differently, a little bit humbly, although that, your personality is your personality. If you want to be arrogant, that's fine, but at least in your communication, make sure you're addressing the issue directly and effectively. So center the other people, don't center yourself, don't personalize it, don't dismiss the other person. Even if you're arrogant, that's fine, but don't dismiss the other person. Don't imply that they're ignorant or stupid. None of those things will help, because as people are watching, people have positions, and it's a hot topic. People have positions. The people who have a position opposite to him will feel like that energy he's got is directed towards them as well. And whatever he says, they won't hear, because all they're hearing is his tone and the way he speaks. So some people are impervious to that kind of stuff, but most people will react first to the manner and the way in which you talk to them before they react to the words. And the way in which he approached that was destructive. It didn't help what he was trying to do. On the other hand, again, these communication platforms, and especially national TV, exist to inform people. And the way this conversation went, and the way she approached it as well, in the end didn't really inform anyone effectively. You'd have to listen quite carefully and not be distracted by the fireworks and the fanfare that's happening in the background to hear what each side is saying. She's concerned about the health of people. He's concerned about essentially the freedom of people. These are two very important things, but we never really fully discuss that issue. And the next thing you know, which South Africans is trending? John speaks for me, or John doesn't speak for me. Society is polarized by that instead of focusing on the issue. And that's exactly why it's important to understand these communication pitfalls, these conversation hijackers, so that when you see them, you can counter them by doing something better. So, winners and losers. Who won, who lost? Well, in my opinion, the losers, the biggest losers, is you and I. All of us could have benefited from a conversation between these two about the benefits of one versus the other. She's on the side of health and safety and life, and he's on the side of freedom. Both are important positions. It would be useful for us to understand each side a little bit better and make our own minds up. But we were robbed of that because it degenerated into a shouting match, essentially. And 4 days after that, all people were talking about was whether they agree with her or agree with him, or John speaks for me, John doesn't speak for me, or whatever the case. But the important conversation, or in my opinion, the more important conversation, has been lost to society because it degenerated into this shouting match. So we lose out there. Because, for instance, this conversation could have developed entirely differently. For example, that list of regulations has many things that are considered problematic. From the fact that if there's a treatment or even a vaccine, you don't have a right to refuse it. That's in the regulations. Also, it gives the government the power to track you on your cell phone if they suspect you have this disease. using third-party companies, and one judge will oversee it, whatever the case. That's an important discussion and would have been a better discussion to have, in my opinion. Also, the fact that these regulations that the DA chose to focus on mostly affect middle-class South Africans. Are they saying now they fully represent middle-class South Africans? I think that's an important question for a political party. And, I personally wish we'd had that discussion. But there are many others, and we don't have to have the ones I like. There are many other things that could have been discussed, but because of these 7 conversation hijackers, we missed out on them. Which makes the biggest winners the National Command Council. They basically escaped scrutiny here because this could have been used as a way to make people more aware of what's going on so that people ask them harder questions about what they're doing and does it make sense for me as an individual. So that's why it's important to know these conversation hijackers and be aware of them so that you can sidestep them when you see them. So that being said, those are the 7 things that I could find. Are there any that you could find? Just let me know in the comments below. Also, if you want to see the full video, I've put a link in the description below. Please share this video with anyone you think might benefit from it or might be interested in it. Thank you for watching.